So I had this plan for a cool image like this for a long time. And I think tonight's actually going to be the night because we do have some pretty good conditions. The sky should be clearing up. Maybe we will even get some cool sunset light. So let's hope everything goes as planned. Otherwise, well, this video won't be published.
Spoiler alert, the first try was a huge failure, but the second attempt was much better. With this video, I want to show my progress from setting up the first photo shoot to finally shooting and editing this image. So what I want to do here is called light painting. I'm basically using a light source to make the subject stand out from the rest of the landscape, while also combining several shots to get sunset colors coupled with some stars and of course the light painted areas themselves. So on location I made sure of course to first find a good composition. I wanted to see the chapel at a 45-degree angle, giving us a view of the entrance as well as the window, and this is giving the whole shot a little more depth. If I would shoot this straight on, the image would become super flat, which is a possible design choice, but for my plan that's not really what I wanted. Once I had the composition, I made sure to properly set up the tripod, so it does not move whatsoever. That's super important because I had to shoot several images from the exact same spot, and this way later I have an easier time when blending the images together. I was ready to start shooting right at sunset. Unfortunately, the clouds were blocking most of the light, so I didn't get any intense colors. Plus, I was facing the wrong direction with the sun setting behind the camera when instead I wanted to have the sunset right behind the subject. This would help to create some kind of silhouette effect with a dark subject in front of a brighter sky, but more on this later. Since I had no sunset to work with, I decided to make use of the clouds, and as they were moving rather fast, I went for a long exposure to show the motion of the clouds. My plan was to use this as my base image and later layer the light painting on top with Photoshop. So as I waited for it to get dark enough to begin with the light painting, I took a few more long exposures just so I had a choice when it came to the base image. But besides that, there is not much to do except wait. Then, after about 45 minutes, it was finally time. I used my headlamp and pointed it against each of the walls visible in the composition. Per image, I only focused on one side of the chapel, which will give me more flexibility when later blending these images. This way, I can decide to include all the walls with light painting, or for example just the entrance. The camera was set to a 30-second exposure, which gave me enough time to properly cover every part of the wall with light. Besides those walls, I also lit up the ground and put a light against the windows, so there appears to be light inside the chapel as well. Although the conditions and the location wasn't great, I thought I had some cool images for the first try. Unfortunately, at some point during this shoot, my Sony camera decided to switch from RAW files to JPEG. And that means there is no way to edit these shots as I want to. So that's the second time this has happened, and I don't know what's causing this. I certainly didn't go into the menu to manually change it. So if you're familiar with this issue and if you have a solution, please let me know, because this is driving me crazy. Anyway, I still roughly blended the JPEG images together to see if it's worth further experimenting with this light painting, and I was really happy with the outcome, so I wanted to give it another shot.
And that's the reason why today is day number 2 of trying to capture this image. Now I'm on the way to a different chapel because I hope then I can shoot against the sun with the chapel in the foreground. Unfortunately, the conditions are not that great. We do have some heavy cloud coverage, but let's see if it's still possible.
As I arrived on the location, the clouds were pretty much gone. The sun was slowly setting behind the subject, so all in all these were really great conditions. Just like on the first try, I set up the camera, set up the composition, made sure the tripod is standing in place like a tank, and then captured the base image. This time the light was a little more contrasty, so I went for a 5-shot HDR base image, making sure I have all the details in the highlights and the shadows. But I also made sure to go a little darker on the exposure to create this silhouette effect. So we have a rather bright sky and a rather dark foreground. I did this on purpose, as I later will be making the subject a lot brighter anyway with my headlamp. So when I finally combine the shots in Photoshop, the light painting effect will be stronger and more visible against the dark foreground that didn't get hit by the light. And once I had the base image, it was time to wait again, until finally I was able to start the light painting process. And like the last time, I was going wall for wall to have more choice when later blending these images. At this point I was already ready to leave, to be honest, because it got super cold and I was way underprepared. As you can see here, my camera already froze. But I still wanted to capture some stars to include in the final image. Here I had to be careful to not expose too long, otherwise I will end up with mini star trails instead of points. I was shooting with a 60mm lens on a full frame camera. That means I could potentially go with a 30-second exposure following the 500 rule, which is basically 500 divided by the focal length. But in the past I had some bad experience with that, so to be safe I went for a slightly shorter shutter speed instead. And at this point I had all the images, so all that's left to do is the editing. So let's check it out in Photoshop. Alright, since this is a little more advanced editing, we are going to use Photoshop. And down below in that film strip you can already see the 10 images we will be using. The first 5 are the HDR bracket, then we do have 4 images for the light painting effect, and finally the last one is being for the stars, which we will add to the sky as well. So let's start with the base image. I'm going to select these 5 first to create the HDR. Once I have selected them, right click, then choose Merge to HDR. Very important here, don't check the Align Image setting, because after I did that the first time I had trouble aligning all the remaining images. So I'm not going to activate this, I'm just hitting the Merge button. Alright, and that's our HDR file. So let's work on this real quick. There's not much going on, however I want to change the profile to Adobe Standard. Then let's open up the lights panel, and of course right away you can see it's way too dark. We want to make it brighter, we want to have at least a little bit of details in the very darkest parts. So I'm going to raise the exposure quite a bit, and we can do that safely because we're working with an HDR file. This is looking great. The sky might be a little bit overexposed in the very brightest areas, so to save these highlights from clipping, I'm going to bring them down. Alright, much better. Still, we are lacking some details in the shadows, so let's change that. I'm going to raise the shadows a little bit right around here. Now we can see some structure in those deeper shadows. We can further improve this by bringing up the blacks. So I would say right around here looks great. And maybe let's even bring up the whites a little bit for some more contrast. This is looking really good. As you can see, we have the sunset behind our subject, which will create this silhouette effect. Now the image like this without light painting is, in my opinion, not usable. But since we're going to add light specifically to the subject, this will make the whole thing pop and look so much better. But before we start that, of course, we need to do some further adjustments. What I want to do with the base image is to make it a lot warmer. So I'm going to open up the color panel and I'm going to bring up the white balance a lot, introducing way warmer sunset colors. Alright, that's looking perfect. We can also bring up the vibrance and maybe even the saturation to boost the color some more. Then let's go into the effects tab. I want this image to look sharp, so I'm going to bring up the texture. And at the same time, I want to have some kind of autumn glow effect added on top. So I'm going to bring down the clarity very gently. And I guess let's also drop the dehaze. That's looking perfect for the base image. Now there is no masking going on, so we're going to save a little bit of time here. What I want to do instead is to jump right into the color grading. And I'm also not going to touch the color mixer. Instead, let's do some split toning. Here we can really spice things up. I use the highlights here to make them really warm. So I'm going to set up the hue Let's go with some orange tone like this. And now let's pump up the saturation. Wonderful. I think we can even use the midtones for some more warmth. Again, I'm going to set up the hue right around here. And let's again bring up the saturation, giving this some nice reddish glow. Of course, we want to keep some color contrast, so I'm going to use the shadows to introduce a cold color tone. I'm setting up the hue with a blue tone, and let's slightly increase the saturation like this. Lovely. Then I also want to head down into the calibration tab, and here I want to quite heavily drop the blue primary hue, which I think just shifts the color in a very nice way. And I'm also going to bring up the saturation. Now I do want to sharpen this image, so let's go through the details tab real quick. Drop the radius, increase the details, add some masking while holding the Alt key so we can nicely target the subject like this. And now let's bring up the amount of sharpening, and we're done editing the base image. Let's quickly compare to before so you can see the difference. This is what we started with our HDR, and here we have the base image for the light painting effect. Now let's take a look at the other images. For the light painting, I have this for the ground. I have this for the entrance of this chapel, and I have this shot for the window. I'm not going to use this one because, as I said earlier, I want to be more flexible, and that's the reason we have been light painting wall by wall, because we don't really need the light on every single wall, which would make the image look more flat again. Instead, I just want the entrance to be bright. How are we editing these light painted images? There's not much going on. What I want to do again is I want to change the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard, just lessening the contrast a bit. And then I want to bring up the highlights and the whites. So let's open up the lights panel and let's bring up the highlights. As you can see, this will make the foreground brighter. And I'm also going to bring up the whites to make this light effect stronger. Okay, we can also play around with the white balance. I think I want to make this a little bit colder, which will kind of create some more color contrast. So let's bring down the temperature a little bit like this. And I'm also going to bring down the vibrance, just so we are not overwhelmed with all these colors. And I'm again sharpening this image in the details tab, just as previously. Bring down radius, increase details, hold down the Alt key while adjusting the masking slider, and then bring up the amount of sharpening, and we're done. Now we can copy these settings to all the other light painted images. So I'm holding down the Shift key to select all of them, right click, then synchronize settings, make sure to check all and hit OK. Now there's one more image left for the raw adjustments, and this is this one for the stars. On this shot, I'm solely focusing on the stars in the sky, nothing more. And I'm going to start this by bringing down the exposure. I'm also going to bring down the shadows. I'm going to drop them quite heavily, and I'm going to bring down the blacks. Now, why am I doing this? The reason is simple. I just want to add the stars to the base image. That means the stars need to be brighter than the sky of the base image. When I bring down shadows and blacks, the night sky in this image will get way darker without affecting the brighter stars. This way I have an easier time blending these images together. I do think I also need to change the white balance temperature, so let's go into the color tab and bring it up. I do want the sky to be a little bit warmer, so let's raise it quite a bit here. And I also want to head into the effects tab, adding texture and clarity, which will make the stars pop a little more. And we can go into the calibration tab further, doing some color adjustments. I'm going to bring down the blue primary hue, giving the sky more of a cyan color tone like this, and maybe raise the saturation some more. Okay, once more we're going to sharpen this image, bring down the radius, increase the details, add the masking. Keep in mind we want to sharpen the stars like this and bring up the amount of sharpening. Done. So now that we have edited all our images, it's time to select them. I'm going to pick up the base image, then the images for the light painting, and the stars image. Then let's click on Open Objects. Now we need to stack all the images in one single Photoshop file. So in here what I'm going to do is to hit Ctrl A to select everything, then Ctrl C to copy the selection. Now go to our base layer, and here I'm hitting Ctrl V to copy this image in this Photoshop file. And I'm going to repeat this step a few times with all the other files. And now comes the fun part, the blending of these images. I'm going to deactivate the stars layer for now, and I'm also going to turn off these light painting layers. Then let me select them, and I'm going to click this folder icon to put them in a group. So all the light painting layers are in this group. Then let's select our base layer, and I want to go to select, choose select sky. With this active sky selection, I'm going back to the layer and click the layer mask icon. Now we have the layer mask for the sky applied to this group, but we want to invert this layer mask, so I'm hitting Ctrl I. And what this layer mask will do, if I turn on the first light painting layer, you can see it's only the foreground that is changing, not the sky. This just makes things a little bit easier, since we only want to really target the subject with this light painting. The next step is to blend this light painting layer with the base layer. Therefore, we're going to change the blending mode from normal to screen. And just like that, you can see we added this light effect on top without pretty much affecting the rest of the foreground. Of course, we can further tweak it, so let's create another layer mask on this particular layer, and we want to mask out this light on the right side. I'm going to use the brush for that, and let's set the foreground color to black since we want to mask it out, and I'm just brushing over this light like this. Done. So that's looking pretty cool. Let's continue. I'm going to activate the second one, and again we want to change the blending mode to screen. And just like this, we create this really cool looking effect. You can see it's really simple with the right base images and the right conditions. I also don't think there's much to mask out, so we can continue with the third layer. Again, just set the blending mode to screen, and there we have light in the window of this chapel. And that's pretty much it for blending the light painting effect on top. Now let's do the same with the stars layer. I am going to put this in a group, and on this group I want to use another layer mask for the sky. So let's again select the base layer, go to filter, go to select sky, and then go back to our stars group and hit the layer mask icon. This time we don't need to invert it since we want to have the sky visible. Then again we need to change the blending mode. I'm using screen one more time. You can see the blending here is a little trickier than before, but don't worry. What we can do is use a layer mask, and I'm going to hit G to bring up the gradient tool, and I set it going from black to transparent. Now I'm going to mask out the foreground like this, and you just need to play around to get a good looking edge. I think right around here looks great. One problem you can see, the stars are not as bright as they should be because of that layer mask. What I'm going to do to fix that is to use the brush one more time, set the foreground color to white, and make the brush nice and soft. And then I'm just going to paint over these stars, bringing back brightness. What we can do as well is to create a levels adjustment layer right here. And I only want this levels adjustment layer to affect the stars layer below. So I'm going to create a clipping mask by holding down the Alt key and clicking between those two layers. Alright, then I'm going to pull up the point for the blacks. You can see this will help blend these two layers a little bit better. And I'm also going to pull up the point for the highlights, which will make the stars a little more visible. So that's a great help. And this, right at this point, this is basically our light painted image. Of course, this is far from perfect, but it was my second proper attempt, and I think I'm really happy with the outcome right now. Of course, we can do a few more things to make it more interesting. So the next step I'm going to do is to merge everything, hitting Ctrl Shift Alt E. Then let's choose the spot healing brush and get rid of all these sensor spots throughout the image. Alright, and now let's add some more specific glow. Let's create a new layer, and I'm going to switch the blending mode to hard light. Again, I'm using the brush by pressing B, make it nice and big and soft. Then let's zoom in. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click right in here to pick up this exact color tone from the bright sky. And let's bring down the brush opacity to around 10%. And now I'm going to add in some glow, carefully brushing in right next to the side of the building and on the horizon level. I'm doing this on the other side as well. So let's make it a little bigger maybe. that's looking great. We could use another layer and switch the blending mode to soft light, which will have a slightly different effect. And again, just paint over this bright spot right here. And we can also work on the stars a bit. So again, new layer. I'm going to set the blending mode to hard light. Then let's zoom in a bit. I'm going to pick the color from this star. Again, you holding down the Alt key. Let's take a look at it. I want to make it slightly warmer, like this. And I'm going to make the brush really, really small and just brush over it a few times to give it some glow. All right, that's looking good. We can choose some random stars to do the same effect using a really, really small brush, just making them a little brighter this way. And just like that, we can make the stars glow a little more. Okay, so that's the finished image. I hope you had as much fun as I with this whole light painting stuff. I'm sure I will be doing more of that in the future. Just need to find the right subjects and have the right conditions for it. Let me know what you think of this kind of video. I know it's a little bit longer, but I think the whole process can be useful to learn. So thank you for watching this video and let me know what you think about it in the comments.